Good evening, America. I know not what the weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with the sticks and stones. This was a prediction made by Albert Einstein. Let's hope that there won't be a third or fourth World War. Right now, Ukraine is the epicenter of a war. Human rights organizations try to find out answers to many questions. Who is responsible for the war? World leaders call for Putin to face war crimes trial. President Biden and other world leaders are calling for Russian President Vladimir Putin to be put on trial for war crimes over his forces' actions in Ukraine. But Alex Witting, a former prosecutor at the International Criminal Court in the Netherlands, says it's unlikely Putin will face many punishments even if he is formally accused. On the other hand, questions are raised against the United States of America on their war crimes in West Asia. Many political analysts ask questions. Who will sanction the US for killing civilians in airstrikes? How it undermined international institutions to cover up its war crimes? How it trampled upon international rules to commit human rights violation? How it used its global clout to evade all its responsibilities on its actions. 2019 airstrikes in Syria killed many civilians. How many of them were terrorists? 22,000 to 48,000 civilians have died in various airstrikes by the US since 2001. Can the US call themselves a lamp of human rights? How could we justify an attack without a warning issued to the civilians? Who is war criminal? Who has to be brought before the War Crimes Court? How the psyche of Ukrainians be formed in the coming months? American Dialogue, powered by Hedge New York, tries to find out answers to these questions. America, right or wrong? My guests today are Dr. Devi Nambiaparambil, a specialist in physical medicine and rehabilitation. She is also a very renowned and active in many TV shows. Sean Abraham, treasurer of the Staten Island Young Republican Club. Kevin George, finance and philosophy specialist, also an IT business analyst. Peter Jacob, a social worker from New Jersey. A warm welcome to all guests and viewers. First to Dr. Devi Nambiad. Dr. Devi, America's decision not to take part in this Ukrainian war was criticized globally. What do you think about this decision?
When this pandemic first started, I actually talked a bit about the history of pandemics, that usually after a pandemic, there is a lot of instability and civil unrest, that, pandemics have precipitated wars in the past. Cholera precipitated the Russian Revolution. The flu pandemic actually laid the groundwork for India to get its independence and for African nations to fight against the British Empire. So the idea that things are unstable in Russia and Ukraine is not new. We should have been looking at Russia and actually at a lot of other countries across the world to see what can we do to keep stability in the region, or at least prevent a lot of the brutality. I think that's something that Joe Biden could have done a little bit differently earlier on. But in terms of other things, I think that there needs to be more fine-tuning to look to see how our sanctions and how our actions are affecting these different countries, not just as a whole, but the different classes of society, like the most vulnerable versus the most rich and powerful. Because if we really want to do anything effective, we have to affect the rich and powerful members of the society, because they're the ones that would be able to stop the aggression.
Kevin, who is responsible for this war?
That question is more convoluted than a quick a specific person. Obviously Russia's decision to invade Ukraine is the cause of the war, but there's also inhibitors on the outside, right? Doctor put it a good way. We could have been analyzing this whole conflict between Ukraine and Russia a lot more in depth 3-4 months ago. Maybe that invasion wouldn't have taken place. there was these questions coming in January whether or not Russia would invade Ukraine, right? And Russia had denied that they would do that, and now we're in the situation where they have invaded. Now, in terms of who is responsible, obviously Russia is the primary factor, unfortunately. But I think it's a factor of events that happen, and you see it now. China has not refuted Russia's decision, right? North Korea, I believe, Syria, Pakistan have supported Russia's decisions. There's a majority of the countries have been against it, but I think we need to be unified in our approach to denounce what's happening. So to answer that question in full, of course, it's Russia's primary factor, but we also can do other. We can make extra steps to stop what's happening right now.
Peter George, we are seeing world in two different segments after the Cold War. Different leaders are accusing each other. Vladimir Putin is saying that Joe Biden is responsible for the war. Vladimir Zelensky is saying that Vladimir Putin is responsible for the war. America is blaming, and European Union is blaming Vladimir Putin for the war. Really, we don't know who is responsible for the war. So what could be the role of America in peacekeeping in this situation?
I'll say first, America is not interested in peacekeeping effort, and it's been very clear. This war was 30 plus years in the making since the fall of the Iron Curtain. The expansion of NATO, when the Iron Curtain fell and Germany was united, the agreement was that NATO will not move an inch eastward. That promise has not been kept. And now it's expanding into Ukraine, which is a national security threat to Russia. I'll be very clear. What Russia is doing is criminal. The death of even one individual, and these are the most intelligent people that we elect or who sit in the highest seats and offices throughout the world. And yet they cannot come to a peaceful solution is a shame. But the fact that the United States and its aggression, especially in Ukraine in 2014, to promote coups and supporting neo-Nazis to get rid of Yanukovych, ultimately, that coup had a ripple effect, leading to what happened in Crimea, what happened in the Donbass. And Zelensky himself was elected on a position in which he would promote peace. But things have changed, and Russia is looking out for their own national security.
Okay, Dr. Devi, after this Ukraine war or after the beginning of this particular war, new friendships are emerging. World nations are forming new allies. And one of such rare combination is the Russia-China combo. So what do you think about this Russia-China equation? And how does that affect the entire world or global leaders' relationships?
It's too soon to tell what's happening between Russia and China, but I think we have to keep an eye. The whole world is watching what we're doing. They've already seen the U.S. With its hasty withdrawal from Afghanistan, a 20-year war that ended in disaster pretty much. So Taiwan is going to see what China does, and everybody else is going to see how we respond to this. So the threat is real, not necessarily because China and Russia are allied, but because the world is looking to see how we'll respond, whether we'll be predictable, whether we'll be consistent, whether we'll be strong, and whether we'll be fair in our response.
Okay, Sean, again we are moving on to the economic front. Now Russia is imposing other nations to use ruble as an international vehicle currency. So how could that impact dollar? What would be the role of dollar in the future in international market? Or how US defend this Russian initiative?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for giving me that question. Thanks for having me. I just want to, we're seeing that right now. We're seeing a change in the reserve currency, and that's really something that we should be concerned about. Currently, the US dollar is the main currency all around the world. It is one of the strongest currencies out there. What we're seeing is there are countries that are usurping the United States on the as a dominant force. We're seeing Russia imposing and telling countries to pay in rubles. We're seeing China expanding because we're stepping off of the world stage. We can see currently the crisis in Sri Lanka, for example, where port cities are being taken over. Pakistan, for example, with the trade route that's being created, the Silk Road. This is a crisis that was manufactured, that has been created, and since we're not stepping up to the plate, countries are taking the lead and are taking over. And what's going to happen is we're going to see a rise in inflation. We're seeing gas prices go up here in New York, inflation rates going up. We are seeing a crisis that is being that is encapsulating many Americans, and what we're seeing is rising crime rates here in New York City. I don't know if Dr. Devi, you might have heard earlier today in our, and I know you campaigned on it. Crime rates are skyrocketing now as we speak. People don't know where to go, and with this, we need the U.S. to be dominant. We need the U.S. to put their foot down, and this is not what's happened. We can fix this crisis right now. Let's have more drilling, more gas. Gas prices can go down easily with more drilling here instead of depending and having foreign dependence on oil from countries abroad. I mean, there are so many solutions to this crisis, but the current administration is not taking a good lead on this, and we're paying the price at the pump.
Okay, Kevin, we know that India's traditional foreign policy is based on non-alignment. But in this case, we know that very silently, India is giving moral support to Russia in many cases. Even it abstained from voting in the United States against Russia, and it didn't openly criticize Russia for its attack, and decided to continue the foreign trade with Russia. So, how could it impact Indo-US relationship, Indo-US strategic and diplomatic relations in future?
I think that's a very good question. I would have to say that would depend on the administration that's in place. And currently with the Biden administration, their stance obviously towards Russia would be stronger than if we were in a scenario where Trump was in place. But with that being said, I don't believe the relationship between India and the U.S. should be strained. India's resistance of making a opposition to Russia, but it causes an overarching issue where India's reluctancy to make that stance. There's other people other countries, I should say, that are following that route. China, to the most prominent one, right? But in terms of the relationship between India and the U.S. or even China and the U.S., I don't believe it should be strained because of India's or China's stance on this crisis.
Peter, just imagine that Donald Trump is ruling the United States of America and what he could have done instead of Joe Biden managing this war.
Well, God help us all that if Donald Trump was still president. The fact of the matter is, the reality is we are in this position because Donald Trump funded money into the pockets of neo-Nazi military officials in the Ukraine. That's what led to the issue in the Donbass right now. Barack Obama saw what was happening in 2014. And he said there was a lot of issues in that White House room. And the fact of the matter is he withdrew from sending more military weapons into Ukraine. I think ultimately, if we want to address this issue, the fact is 40% of natural gas that came into Europe came through Russia. Yesterday, we saw thousands of scientists across the world protest fossil fuels. This war is not just geopolitical. This war is a war about oil. Then again, what war is not about oil? If we move away from fossil fuels and we invest in clean energy, instead of bumping up the military budget by $750 million plus, let's invest here at home for the needs of the people. Let's move away from fossil fuels. Let's ensure that we have healthcare, education. Let's build our roads. Let's build our hospitals. Let's get some doctors out there. Let's get some construction workers out there and rebuild America. That's the kind of work we should be doing. Donald Trump would do nothing except for serve his own interests, maybe put a golf club somewhere in Ukraine. I think that's the best he'd do if he were president right now.
Okay. Sean, Russia-Ukraine war is very badly hit global economy. Asia Pacific is very negatively hit by, Asian markets are hit by this war. Then inflation is very high in US now. So how could the Biden administration manage these matters?
Well, it's straightforward. Don't aggravate our current allies. I mean, I heard some people mention that we shouldn't aggravate, but I don't know if you guys have seen the Biden administration is proposing sanctioning India for violating CATSA. CATSA is an act that says that if you buy goods, military goods, defense goods, goods in general, maybe for example, India is a big importer of products for farming. Um, you will be sanctioned under CATSA. And the Biden administration is currently debating that issue right now today. And this is something that the Biden admin is not doing a good job on. Foreign policy. They are aggravating our current allies. They're aggravating a good ally, India, which is a central dominant force in taking down terrorism, a counter force to Pakistan. And what we're seeing today is a backward operation from the Biden administration. The second point I want to mention that I heard Peter talk about was the fact that the Trump administration would have done nothing. That's absolutely false because the Biden administration just last year cut aid to Ukraine last summer. And why didn't the Russian administration take over Ukraine? If Trump and Ukraine were buddies, he would have taken over Ukraine under Trump admin. That didn't happen. This all started back when the Obama administration allowed or didn't do anything to Russia when they took over Crimea. They saw that nothing's going to happen, and we see Putin under VP Biden, current President Biden, taking over more Ukraine because we didn't do anything under both admins. I mean, he's given the green light.
What I said is,
What
and to
else do you want?
clarify again, what I said is that
Let's
the
ask
United
Peter.
States
Peter, would
under
you like
Trump
to comment on that?
put weapons into. Yes, yeah, thank you. What I said was, to clarify for Sean, the Trump administration funneled weapons into a neo-Nazi infested military in Ukraine. That's what promoted this issue and made it even worse. Instead of peace and holding up the Minsk Accord, which was in place until 2019, Trump aggravated the situation leading to this crisis. Instead of peace, now we have sanctions and we're on the brink of World War III. But who's surprised that Trump isn't walking us into World War III?
Now it's not Ukraine versus Russia. Now it's Sean versus Peter. Sean.
No, I mean, what Nazi regime? I mean, that's then you're feeding the argument that Putin is saying, which is denazifying Ukraine. I mean, I would really like some clarification on that. Both the Trump admin and the Biden administration were not friendly or in terms of delivering aid to Ukraine. Trump admin threatened to cut aid. The Biden administration cut aid. I don't know what you're getting that where there's Nazis or he's feeding or he's giving troops or he's giving arms to a Nazi battalion in Ukraine, because then that's the whole argument of the Putin administration, which is the denazification of Ukraine, which I hope you don't stand with that.
Kevin, I wish to ask
think,
the same. Yeah, please, Peter.
Well, I think you're missing a lot of information because the fact is, if you use your eyes and look on TV and see the patches that they're wearing, it is pretty clear those are neo-Nazi symbols. Eyes don't lie.
Yeah, eyes don't lie. That's what he's saying. Do you wish to comment?
I mean, I don't know how I can correct it without showing the actual record because the record of the fact is, that is the argument that Putin is saying, and following that same argument, you're for the Russia denazifying Ukraine because that's their whole argument. I mean, we know for a fact
Check with
that
the U.S. military intelligence. This is pretty clear. This has been a long time coming. It's not surprising that there is neo-Nazi elements. Are you denying that's not even a single neo-Nazi in Ukraine? People are leaving from the United States to go fight with Ukraine because they identify as with the white privilege aspects of what's going on there. So they are going into Ukraine.
So you're for the
fight,
war?
And now they don't have weapons or helmets. This is the New York Times even explained this. This is pretty clear
Peter,
cut.
no, that's not right. You're for So okay, we're
Many
saying you're saying we
criticize
shouldn't do
Trumplicans. Many criticize them as Trumplicans, and they say that Trumplicans don't need facts. They don't need authentic information. So now I am suspicious.
This is I don't understand where he's getting. Maybe it's one person or two people, but two people don't represent the whole Ukrainian army. I mean, our goods are going to the Ukrainian army force, which is trying to beat Russia. They're trying to defend their territory. And if you're saying that because there's one or two people in an army that's hoisting,
it's not one or two
having,
people, bro. It's
Nazi-
a whole bunch of people. You know, there is a strong
But that's
element,
not the whole
like there is in
battalion.
Russia,
That
and
isn't
there
the whole
could be
battalion. It's
in
one.
the United States as well. But this is significant. In fact, those people, they hate the Roma, they hate the Russians. Why do you think they want to annex the Donbass and eastern portions? Because most of them are Russians. The neo-Nazis, the nationalists want to get rid of any of those elements within that country. Zelensky is put in a hard position in between them as well. This is pretty clear. You could read any media sources and, you know, the narrative is switching so we could continue military aid into the area.
No,
That
my
is why we're
question
not
is,
talking
my
about
question
neo-Nazis.
is that, do you justify Russian action?
I think according to Peter,
are
he's
you-
justifying Russian
Yeah,
action.
I don't condone
Yeah, I would
war.
love to hear that.
I don't condone war at all. But like I said at the beginning of this, even the death of one individual, I consider a war crime. But we have to understand what happened and we have to make sense of what's happening. Rather than sanctions and boycotting and divestment that we're seeing, we need to bring the United States, Russia, and Ukraine to sit at the table together for peace accords. That's what we need to do. Not more sanctions, because that would drive us into World War III. That would drive ultimately to a complete economic realignment that we're seeing between Russia, China, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is not taking our phone calls. You know, we're asking them to pump oil and we're ignoring them. The reality is we don't want peace because the military-industrial complex needs to drop bombs on nations we will never visit, on children no different from our very own. Just ask the Yemenis, ask the Palestinians, ask the Somalians. Look what happened to Iraq and Afghanistan. Do you trust the country that totally forgot about the Afghani people to care about Ukraine all of a sudden? Please, come on. This is not about the Ukrainian people.
Okay,
This
let's
is not
ask
about
Kevin
peace.
because he
This is
has
about
been
war
listening
and
very
money.
patiently to both of your arguments. Kevin, you have been listening too long for their arguments, and they were telling. No, Peter was telling that a peace talk. He's suggesting a peace talk. U.S., Ukraine, Russia. They should sit together and find a solution. Do you think that such a peace talk would make a conclusion to the war?
I was peacefully sitting, but I was enjoying that. I love conflicts make a better future. I don't want to say arguments. It's not an argument because we have our own opinions, and honestly, the only way we get to a better future is through conflicting ideas. If everyone agreed to everything, we would be sitting at the same table. But with that being said, I mean, Peter makes a good point, right? If we can get to the table to start talking about a peace accord, a treaty, that's what everyone wants. That's the ultimate goal. The question is whether or not Russia would be willing to do that. And I just want to comment one thing on the conversations that were happening before. We can go on and on about how this crisis has been led up to, what happened, what is the results of a lot of things that were brewing. I think we do need to analyze that in the near future, but more importantly, we need to take steps to what Peter said, is to bring peace. Because right now, you can see the alignment coming up slowly, right? With China, Pakistan, North Korea, Syria, Russia. And on the other side, we have the NATO countries. And we got to do whatever we can to avoid World War III. And that's the ultimate statement that I would like to make. And that's our position. If we can get to the peace table, everyone should be all for it.
Okay. Sean, I would like to ask you two questions. One, whom to be blamed for this war? Two, could you predict the end of this war?
Oh, I don't think anyone can predict. If I can predict, I would be at the White House. I mean, I think one of the things is who to blame. It's obviously going to be the Putin, his regime. They obviously started the aggression. They started the fights. I think everyone, I hope across the board, agrees with that. How and whether what's the end goal of the fight? I think personally, Ukraine has to give up that region. I hate to say that, but there's not much that can happen because, again, like I mentioned previously, that region after during Obama administration, when Ukrainians lost Crimea, we saw a lot of Russians had infiltrated Crimea, and when they had that election, whether you want to call it an election or not, they decided to become a part of Russia. Again, Donbass region is really, I don't want to say infested, but a lot of Russians are living there, whether they're from Russia, Russian leaning people. It's been a part of Russia for the past 8 years or so, ever since the 2008, 2009, around then when there were talks or merging of Russian influence on that region, that Donbass region, that Crimea region. So as much as we should keep that region, I think it's too late for that. If this talk happened about 8 years ago before Crimea was taken over, I would say, yeah, definitely, let's fight for that. Let's make sure that we keep that. But I think that battle is long fought. I think it's too late for that. I think that region has to be given up, and that's the only amicable solution to that. Economically, we're going to be suffering for quite some time. I hate to put it any nicely. Gas prices are going up. Energy prices are going up. I mean, people are going to say, let's switch to EV. But the solution that the Biden administration and Pete Buttigieg is proposing is pay $7 at the pump or buy a $75,000 Tesla, which no average American or average Americans are unable to afford that, especially with delivery dates looking at 2023. So the amicable solution is more fracking, more oil, making sure there's more oil being pumped in the U.S. to compensate for that, and also giving up that region because it's long gone. It's been taken over about 8 years ago. There's too much Russian influence in that area for anything good to come.
Okay, it's time to wind up this episode. Thank you so much, Dr. Devi, Sean, Peter, and Kevin. Thank you so much. Let's hope the world be a better place for you, for me, and the entire human race. Let's come together to heal the world. With this hope, we are concluding this episode. See you next week with another topic. Till then, this is Christina Cherian signing off. Stay safe and take care.
ലോകത്തെവിടെയായാലും ഏത് സമയത്തും 24 വാർത്തകളും ഓഗ്മെന്റഡ് റിയാലിറ്റി പാക്കേജുകളും എക്സ്പ്ലെയിനറുകളും വിശദമായി കാണാൻ ഞങ്ങളുടെ യൂട്യൂബ് ചാനൽ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് സബ്സ്ക്രൈബ് ചെയ്യാം.